So, we are now at the last Sunday of 6 weeks of Lent, the anticipation of Easter. Today, as we mentioned, is Palm Sunday, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, greeted like a king. But between the triumphant Palm Sunday and the triumphant Resurrection Sunday, a lot happened. A lot that was full of confusion and betrayal and fear and failures and painful tears. And frankly, Lent focuses more on that reality as a way to grasp the contrasting joy that Christ's death and resurrection brings to our sorrowful condition. The verse we've had up as our welcome slide all series long has been Jesus' words to his disciples, "You will be sorrowful, but your sorrow will turn to joy." So after 3 R's that we do during Lent, remembrance, repentance, and resistance, we've talked now about R's that Jesus does. Pastor John talked to us about how he renews us and he redeems us, and today he restores us. Restoration. So when we think of the word restoration or restore and the ways that it's commonly used in the way we speak, in our lingo, there are a number of things that come to mind. I think there are about 3 main angles to the same basic concept when it comes to restoration as we use it. The first is that restore officially means to give back something that was lost. To give back something that was lost. To literally restore, right? To store again. To restock empty shelves. Or like to refill an empty glass. The Bible uses it to speak of a thief restoring what he took to its owner. Someone's health can be restored if they've lost their vibrance, their strength, whether physically or emotionally. So in this case, if you need restoration, you are empty with the need to be refilled or restocked. Empty with the need to be refilled and restocked. For that reason, out of that comes the second definition that you'll find, and that's bringing someone or something back to its original strong state. Okay, bringing someone or something back to its original strong, healthy, vibrant, vigorous state. This usually implies a difficult process of going back in order to go forward. You have to clean out the bad and fill it up with the good. And the first example that comes to my mind is when your phone is running slowly, when it's freezing up on you. It's tired, it's weighed down with all of that clutter. It's effectively broken. It's lost its former efficiency, and it's kind of a mess. Now, sometimes the desperate last resort is to restore it to factory settings, right? Restore to factory settings. And when we do that, it means going back to its original state and starting fresh. A new beginning. And then, of course, when it's restored to factory settings, the desperate top question you'll find on Google that involves the word restore is, how do I restore my device, right? My apps, my data, my pictures, my contacts. Who here has at one point lost their contacts? It's a pretty rough process. Got to back that up. Well, in this case, if you need restoration, you're effectively broken with the need to be rebooted and rebuilt. Effectively broken with the need to be rebooted and rebuilt. Similarly, another common context that we hear restore in is when someone is restoring an old car, right? It's run down. It's weary. It's broken, dirty. It's lost its former power and passion and purpose. It's a mess. But the mechanic takes it back in order to bring it forward. He actually takes it apart to its bare bones. He cleans everything and puts it back together, but better, with new parts. Fresh. A new beginning. He restores it to the original strong condition of its youth. Back to its former glory and ready to head back out onto the highway. Sometimes this process honestly takes forever. It takes a lifetime, but it's worth it because the owner is always super proud to show it off. So out of these two angles comes the final one. We also use restore when it comes to restoring relationships. In this case, if you need restoration, you are basically like an enemy with the need to be refriended, let's say, or reconciled. If you've had a major fight with your friend and you're not on speaking terms, like you haven't spoken in a long time, you have a loss. You've lost that connection, that closeness. You've lost that contact. There's an emptiness there. And your relationship is effectively broken. It's a mess. So in order to move forward towards any sort of restoration, it's necessary to go back, clean up the mess, and rebuild. So the final connection I want to make with the word restoration is maybe a linguistic connection you didn't notice. But did you know that restaurant actually comes from the word restoration? It's really, I think it's more obvious in Spanish. Restauración, restaurante. It's like the same thing. The basic idea is that this is a place where your strength is restored with food. A place to have your strength restored. Now, as a nerd, I was interested in the origin of this, and I discovered that supposedly the first person to coin this phrase restaurant for what we know it to be today was this guy in France in 1765. I'm not going to say his name. Maxime can help me. But he opened a shop where he sold this stew, this guiso, called, now, Maxime, can you actually help me? Bouchon Restaurant. It's translated as a restoring broth. Ahí va. I was pretty close. I feel pretty good about my pronunciation. So yeah, that's what he called it. And it was intended to restore people's strength. And I found something really interesting. This guy, in order to draw customers, he put a sign up in his window. It was a play on Jesus' words from Matthew 11 in Latin, which translates to, "Come to me, all whose stomachs are distressed, and I will restore you." I found that accidentally profound. Because today we're going to focus on the disciple Peter and his restoration with Jesus. And I think it's not a coincidence that when Jesus was restoring Peter, there's food involved. We're going to look at John 21 that we just read and the story of Peter going to Jesus' seaside restaurant, a place to be restored. When Peter was in the boat with the other disciples and Jesus called out to him, it's as if Jesus hung up a sign saying, "Jesus Seaside Restaurant, come to me, all who are distressed, and I will restore you." Because this is where Jesus both restored Peter's physical strength to help him feel full after feeling empty with actual food. It's also where he restored his spiritual and emotional and relational emptiness. But Jesus' process of restoration was bringing him backward to be able to go forward. Now, Peter is famous enough that even if you don't have a background in church, you probably have heard of him. But maybe you don't know enough about him to really form an opinion. But there are others of us from traditions that really elevate Peter as like super holy and saintly. And then on the other hand, there are traditions that really focus so heavily on how much of an impulsive mistake maker he was. He's always talking and acting without thinking. It gets him into some real foot-in-mouth situations. But I think somewhere between those two extremes is the reality of arguably the most relatable individual in the Bible. Because Peter is someone who is passionate, he tries so hard, he does his best, and that gets him some big wins. But it also gets him some big fails, some losses. And often the biggest fails come right after his biggest wins. Who can relate to that? But he shows us someone who continually made mistakes, but was also continually willing to be restored to not only do great things for Jesus, but to be good with Jesus relationally. Because whether he was excelling or falling, Jesus clearly loved Peter. Peter clearly loved Jesus. They were best friends. But this time of year, the week before Easter, the Peter moment that gets the most attention is his greatest fail, his greatest need for restoration. It's the scene where he disowned Jesus. He denied he even knew him 3 times outside the court where Jesus was being tried. This after not long before, when Jesus was predicting the type of death he was going to endure. He prophesied that his friends would all abandon him. And Peter said, you know what? No. Even if all these guys abandon you, if they all fall away, I never will. In other words, I truly love you more than these. And Jesus told him, that may be, but truly I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So on that night, there Peter was. To his credit, when the other disciples fled and they didn't dare to get even close, he actually valiantly followed the arrested Jesus to the courthouse. But while warming himself by the fire outside, when asked 3 different times, "Aren't you a friend of his?" Each time he said, "No. No, I'm not. I don't even recognize him. If that's him, I'm out." The rooster crows. Peter remembers Jesus' words, and one gospel even says that Jesus turned and looked at him. Can you imagine? He went away weeping bitterly. When Peter messed up, he felt empty and broken. And he felt more like one of these enemies of Jesus than his friend. He was in desperate need of restoration. And so when we get to the end of John's gospel, he seems to have lost some of his passion and his power and his purpose. Because even though Jesus at this point had resurrected and appeared a couple of times to them, Peter was back doing what he was always doing before Jesus called him. He was out fishing. So in John chapter 21, honestly, as I read this chapter, I'm amazed at how intentional Jesus is with Peter. This whole scene seems purposeful for his restoration process. Jesus takes Peter backward in order to go forward. He does and says so many things to put Peter in remembrance. And if this were a movie, this is where we would get all those flashback scenes, right? So notice these details of the story, if you have it there in front of you. The disciples are on a fishing boat in the Sea of Galilee. Jesus calls out across the water. He performs the miracle of an overflowing catch of fish after they came up empty all night. And as soon as this happens, the second that someone says, "That's the Lord," Peter dives into the water and goes straight toward Jesus. Jesus said, "Come to me and have breakfast." As if Jesus hung up that sign that said, "Jesus Seaside Restaurant. Come to me, all who are distressed, and I will restore you." And that's exactly what happened. See, this wasn't the first time that Jesus made this miraculous catch of fish happen. In fact, there was one other time. It just so happens to be the very beginning of their friendship. The day that Jesus met Peter and asked him to be his follower. So I put up the references for each of these that you can turn to them if you would like. But in Luke 5, Peter and his fishermen colleagues, many of these same guys who were present in John 21, they had tried all night to catch some fish, and they came up empty. Then this teacher, Jesus, came by and told them to try again. Throw the net back in. With skepticism, they did it, and their nets were absolutely overflowing with fish. It says it filled the boats so full that they were starting to sink. Immediately, as soon as this happens, Peter knew this is him. This is the Lord. Because he suddenly became aware of his own weakness. His instant reaction was falling to Jesus' feet and saying, "Lord, I am a sinful man. You're going to want to get away from me. You're clearly holy. I'm messed up. I'm not worthy to get close to you." Wow. Think about the significance of that statement in light of where Peter is now in John 21. When Jesus triggered his memory with this second miraculous catch, it was a time where part of Peter probably wanted to say to Jesus even more, "Lord, you're going to want to get away from me. I'm really a sinful man." But back on that first day, Jesus had essentially said, "Yeah, you are. But instead of me getting away from you, how about you come with me? Instead of me getting away from you, how about you come with me?" He said, "Don't be afraid, come with me." And Peter dropped everything to go with Jesus. That day, the second that Peter recognized this is the Lord, he immediately got out of the boat and he jumped headfirst into following Jesus. He said, "If it's him, I'm all in." When Peter met and put trust in Jesus, he went from empty to full. He went from essentially and effectively broken to eternally rebuilt. He went from enemy of God to friend of Jesus, God in human flesh. So in John 21, Peter didn't say, "You're going to want to get away from me." The second Peter recognized, "This is the Lord," he immediately got out of the boat, jumped into the water, and he went straight for Jesus. Peter said, "If it's him, I'm all in." I like how by taking Peter back to his start with Jesus, he's like reinstating him with this new beginning. And Jesus calling from across the Sea of Galilee to the disciples in their fishing boat triggers another major Peter memory. The other time that Jesus was across the water calling out to them, he was actually walking on the water. And that time, the disciples thought he was a ghost until he said, "Don't be afraid. It's me." And Peter's immediate reaction was to say, "If it's you, Lord, Tell me to come to you." And Jesus said, "Come to me." So Peter dropped everything to go to him. He got out of the boat and started walking on the stormy waves. So again, Jesus said, "Don't be afraid. Come to me." And Peter dropped everything, including his safety, to go to him. The second Peter recognized, "This is the Lord," he immediately got out of the boat and he jumped out onto the water to go to Jesus. He said, "If it's him, I'm all in." But you may know the story. Suddenly, Peter became aware of his own weakness and he started to fall. His immediate reaction was, "Lord, save me. Lord, save me." And Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. See, Peter went from saying, "You're going to want to get away from me because I'm messed up," to, "I'm messing up. I want you to come help me." Now, many times we'll hear this story as, well, there goes Peter messing up again. Come on, silly Peter, you have little faith. Why didn't you believe hard enough? But you know what? He at least got out of the boat. He got out of the boat. None of the other disciples fell because they all stayed safe on the boat. None of them fell, but they also didn't get to walk on water. They didn't get to experience Jesus reaching down and picking them up. So now, Jesus had already started taking Peter back in order to go forward before he even gets to the Jesus Seaside restaurant. But when the disciples get to shore, in John 21, Jesus had breakfast on the fire. And it specifically says he had bread and fish for them. With the sight and smell of that, Peter's memory would have flashed back once more to the most memorable time they had bread and fish on the shore of this same Sea of Galilee right before the walking on water incident. That time they had landed and found a crowd of 5,000 plus people. It says Jesus had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he started restoring their physical strength with his healing. And he started restoring their spiritual health with his teaching. And at a certain point, the disciples said, "It's getting too late. We have to send them away. They're getting hungry." And Jesus said to Peter and the others, "Don't send them away. You feed them." And they said, "This is not even remotely possible to feed all these people. Like, it would take half a year's salary just for everyone to get a little bite. Like, they would still have empty stomachs, and we don't even have the resources for that." And that's when Jesus took 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish and somehow caused it to overflow like the miraculous catch. He caused it to be enough for everyone to be full. So full that what they couldn't eat, they gathered into 12 to-go baskets. One to restore the strength of each disciple. See, with Jesus, it's never too late. And it's never impossible. He has the resources and his shelves are never empty. But now, John 21, at Jesus Seaside Restaurant, the place of restoration. It wasn't too late and it wasn't impossible. Peter felt empty, and Jesus was refilling him and restocking him with the strength that he'd lost. Jesus reminded him of his passion, his power, and his purpose. Imagine Jesus and Peter and the others sitting around, warming themselves by a fire, just like Peter was doing when he disowned Jesus 3 times. He was taking Peter back to go forward. Jesus said, "Remember, Peter, when you mentioned I truly love you more than these? Isn't that true? Peter said, yes, you know that I love you. And just like Peter said, he's not my friend, I do not recognize him 3 times. Now Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? He was rewriting his story. Peter was effectively broken, and Jesus was rebooting him and rebuilding him. Because in a moment of weakness, Peter had refused to be known as his friend, to try to blend in with his enemies. So Jesus was refriending Peter and reconciling Peter to himself. But by the 3rd time Jesus asked, it says Peter was hurt. Of course he was. We can understand that. But it reminds us that the going back hurts. If the old car had feelings that could tell us about it, it would say that the restoration process is painful. But when you and I are weary, when we're broken down, when we need to be restored, when we've lost our former power and passion and purpose, we're a mess. But the mechanic, he takes us back to go forward. He takes us apart to the bare bones, and he cleans us up and puts us back together, but better, with new parts. He restores us to our original intended state, fresh, a new beginning, ready to head out to the highway with our former glory. The painful process sometimes takes a lifetime, but it's worth it because the owner is always proud to show us off. But each time Peter affirmed, you are the Lord, you know that I love you. And just like the beginning of Peter's journey, Jesus says, follow me. Come with me. And in this, Peter's new beginning, he dropped everything to go with him. And Jesus kept saying, feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep. As if Jesus hung up that sign for all, saying, hey, Jesus Seaside Restaurant, come to me, all who are distressed, and I will restore you. Jesus was saying to Peter, come with me, I will restore you, and then find those sheep without a shepherd and invite them into this restoration. Peter, those who are lost, those who have lost, those who are empty, and those who make others feel empty, those who are broken and messed up, not unlike you, take care of them, feed them, invite them to be restored, invite them to my restaurant. Come with me and let's restore my people. And Peter went on to be the top leader in the church movement that Jesus had intended him to be. But you know what? He wasn't perfect from that point on either. He kept having his fails, but he also had some major wins that never would have happened if he didn't keep trying and didn't keep getting restored. So now when you and I mess up when it comes to God's design and desire for us, it's not a small thing. It has harmful effects on our relationships with God, with others, also with ourselves internally. But because of what Jesus did on the cross, we can be cleansed once and for all when we meet him and put our trust in him. Then we go from empty to full, from effectively broken to eternally rebuilt, from enemy of God to friend of Jesus, the God-man. But while we wait for that day that he's promised to restore all things, it's not going to feel that way every day. We're actually probably going to fall every day. But Jesus' restoration is also a process, and he who began a good work in you is faithful to complete it. So this might be you. if you're realizing that you've been living on empty, you've been living broken, honestly, as an enemy of God for so long, and thinking about faith, you might honestly want to say to Jesus, I'm so messed up. You're going to want to get away from me. But Jesus says, yeah, I know you are, but I don't want to get away from you. I'd much rather you come with me. So I would encourage you to get out of the boat. Come to Jesus and he will restore you. Make the decision that gives you a new beginning. Because you're never too messed up for Jesus to restore you. But if you've already made that decision, maybe this is you. If you're realizing how long you've been trying and struggling and maybe considering giving up on this faith and the lifestyle, you might feel like saying to Jesus, I'm messing up, but I want you to come help me. And Jesus says, I'm faithful to catch you and pick you up when you fall, and to forgive you and cleanse you from all unrighteousness. So I would encourage you to keep getting out of the boat. Keep reaching to Jesus, and he will keep restoring you. Don't let your mistakes or lack of faith or shame or weariness prevent you from getting back out there and risking for him, taking risks for him. Because it can be super easy after sticking your neck out there so many times to just be quiet, stay safe, just lay low and survive. Just be normal and do what everyone else does. Maybe your passion fire is out, but keep trying. I'm saying this to myself too. Don't give up. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you're never too messed up for Jesus to restore you. And finally, when you're trying to help others, you may feel like saying to Jesus, honestly, I feel like it's too late. It's impossible. I don't have the resources to help this person. But Jesus says, you know what? It's not, though. It's not too late. It's not impossible. I'll take care of you so that you have the strength to take care of others. I'll give you more than you need so that you can give to others. So I would encourage you to keep helping others get out of the boat. Keep receiving from Jesus, and he actually can restore people through you. You'll be amazed, because you're never too messed up for Jesus to restore through you.